I'm Abigail Porter, 48 years old, and I spent 15 years building the most successful regional marketing division in our company's history, only to watch them hand my job to a 26-year-old with zero experience, because his last name happened to be Cromwell. But what they did to cover it up was even worse. If you've ever been undermined at work by nepotism and corporate politics, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of professional betrayal. My career in pharmaceutical marketing began almost by accident in 2008. Fresh out of my MBA program at 33, I was desperate for any position that would pay my student loans and support my teenage daughter Emma. The economy had just crashed, and marketing positions were scarce. I'd been rejected from 12 companies when a former professor mentioned an opening at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, a mid-sized company specializing in respiratory medications. The salary was modest, the office was cramped, and the marketing department consisted of exactly 3 people, including me. But Dr. Patricia Hensley, the VP of marketing, saw something in me during that interview that I hadn't even seen in myself. "Abigail," she said, leaning back in her worn leather chair while reviewing my portfolio, "your campaign concepts show real understanding of patient psychology. Most marketers in pharma focus on doctors and forget that patients are making emotional decisions about their health. You get that." She was right. Having watched my own mother struggle with COPD, I understood that medication marketing wasn't just about clinical efficacy, it was about hope, dignity, and quality of life. Dr. Hensley became more than a boss, she became the mentor who taught me that authentic marketing could actually serve patients while driving business results. Those early years were a masterclass in pharmaceutical marketing from someone who genuinely cared about patient outcomes. Dr. Hensley had me shadow her in physician meetings, conference presentations, and FDA compliance reviews. She insisted I understand every aspect of drug development, from clinical trials to post-market surveillance. "Never market something you don't understand," she'd say, making me read medical journals until I could discuss bronchodilator mechanisms with pulmonologists. By my second year, I was managing the launch campaign for Airflow Pro, our new COPD medication. The campaign focused on real patient stories rather than just medical jargon, and it generated a 340% increase in prescription requests within 6 months. Dr. Hensley taught me that great marketing in pharmaceuticals required building genuine relationships with healthcare providers. She'd take me to medical conferences where I learned to listen more than I spoke, understanding physicians' daily challenges before ever pitching our products. I discovered that many doctors felt overwhelmed by pharmaceutical reps who didn't understand clinical realities. Instead of traditional sales presentations, I developed educational seminars that addressed real treatment gaps. Physicians began requesting me specifically for consultations, and our medical affairs team started incorporating my insights into their clinical studies. By year 3, my relationship-based approach had increased our market share in respiratory medications by 23%. The real breakthrough came when I proposed expanding beyond traditional COPD treatments into the emerging asthma management market. Most companies were focused on acute rescue medications, but I saw an opportunity in long-term control therapies that could prevent attacks rather than just treat them. I spent months researching patient adherence patterns, interviewing allergists, and studying international treatment protocols. My comprehensive market analysis convinced the executive team to invest $12 million in developing an innovative combination therapy. Dr. Hensley championed my proposal to the board, and suddenly I wasn't just a marketing coordinator anymore, I was spearheading the company's largest product development initiative. When Aries launched in 2012, it became the most successful product introduction in Meridian's history. My integrated campaign included patient education programs, physician training modules, and digital tools that helped patients track their symptoms. The medication achieved $45 million in first-year sales, exceeding projections by 180%. More importantly, clinical data showed significantly improved patient outcomes compared to standard treatments. Healthcare journals featured our approach as a model for patient-centered pharmaceutical marketing. The campaign won 3 industry awards, including the prestigious PharmExec Marketing Excellence Award. Dr. Hensley was promoted to Senior VP, and she immediately recommended me for the newly created Director of Regional Marketing position. By 2015, I was managing marketing operations across 7 states with a team of 12 professionals and an annual budget of $8.5 million. My division consistently outperformed national averages in every metric that mattered: market penetration, physician engagement, patient satisfaction, and revenue growth. I'd built a team culture focused on scientific integrity and patient advocacy, hiring specialists who understood both marketing strategy and medical science. Jennifer Walsh, my senior campaign manager, had a PhD in pharmacology. Marcus Chen, our digital marketing lead, was a former clinical researcher. Lisa Rodriguez managed physician relations and had previously worked in hospital administration. Together, we transformed pharmaceutical marketing from simple product promotion into comprehensive medical education. Our success wasn't just measured in sales figures. The respiratory care community began recognizing Meridian as a thought leader in patient-centered treatment approaches. I was invited to speak at the American Thoracic Society conference, published articles in medical marketing and media, and served on advisory panels for the FDA's patient engagement initiatives. My team's campaigns were studied in business schools as examples of ethical pharmaceutical marketing. We proved that commercial success and patient welfare weren't mutually exclusive; they were synergistic when approached thoughtfully. The golden period lasted from 2015 to 2020. During those 5 years, my regional division generated over $200 million in revenue while maintaining the industry's highest physician satisfaction ratings. I received 2 promotions, bringing my salary to $145,000 plus performance bonuses that often exceeded $50,000 annually. My team expanded to 18 people, and I was managing partnerships with major medical centers across the region. Emma had graduated from college with minimal student debt thanks to my career success, and I'd purchased a home in a great school district where she could visit with her future children. But corporate success stories never exist in isolation. While my division thrived, other parts of Meridian were struggling. The company's cardiovascular medications faced increased competition from generics, and 2 high-profile drug launches had failed to meet revenue projections. New FDA regulations were increasing compliance costs, and several pharmaceutical companies our size were being acquired by larger corporations. In 2019, CEO Richard Cromwell announced a strategic restructuring that would optimize operational efficiency. Corporate speak for layoffs and department consolidations. Dr. Hensley, now Senior VP of Marketing and Development, tried to shield my division from the corporate turbulence. She argued convincingly that respiratory medications represented Meridian's most stable growth sector and that my team's expertise was irreplaceable. The board agreed, temporarily, but I started noticing subtle changes in company dynamics. Executive meetings became more secretive. New policies required additional approval layers for marketing expenditures. Most concerning, Richard Cromwell's son Tyler had joined the company as a strategic consultant despite having 0 pharmaceutical experience and a bachelor's degree in communications from a party school. Tyler Cromwell was 26, confident, and completely unqualified for any meaningful role in pharmaceutical marketing. His previous experience consisted of 2 years managing social media for a craft brewery and 6 months as a business development associate at his father's golf club. Yet somehow he was attending executive strategy meetings and offering opinions on clinical trial design and FDA compliance strategies. I first encountered him during a quarterly review meeting where he questioned why we were wasting money on physician education programs. "Can't we just do influencer marketing like other industries?" he asked, apparently unaware that pharmaceutical marketing is heavily regulated and that influencers can't make medical claims about prescription medications. The morning of October 15, 2020, started like any other day. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., reviewed overnight reports from our clinical partners, and prepared for a presentation to potential investors interested in our asthma management platform. My assistant Katie had arranged my usual Tuesday schedule team meeting at 9 a.m., physician advisory board call at 11 a.m., and lunch with representatives from Johns Hopkins who were considering a research collaboration. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and the nervous energy that accompanied high-stakes presentations. I'd rehearsed my talking points 3 times and had backup slides for every possible question. At 8:45 a.m., just 15 minutes before my team meeting, Katie knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before. "Abigail, Richard Cromwell wants to see you in his office immediately," she said quietly. "He said to come alone and to bring your laptop and access cards." Something about her tone made my stomach drop. In 15 years at Meridian, I'd been called to the CEO's office exactly twice, once to receive a promotion, and once to accept an industry award on behalf of the company. This felt different. Richard Cromwell's corner office occupied prime real estate on the executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the research campus and downtown skyline. Medical journals and pharmaceutical industry publications covered his mahogany desk, and the walls displayed his medical degree from Johns Hopkins, his MBA from Wharton, and framed photos from various industry conferences. He'd built Meridian from a small generic drug manufacturer into a respected mid-tier pharmaceutical company, and his office reflected both his medical background and business acumen. When I entered, he was standing by the window rather than sitting behind his desk, never a good sign. "Abigail, please sit down," he said without turning around. "I need to discuss some organizational changes that will affect your position." The words hit me like ice water. Organizational changes. In corporate speak, that phrase never preceded good news. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, laptop bag still in my hand, mind racing through possible scenarios. Had our quarterly numbers been disappointing? Was there a compliance issue I didn't know about? Had a competitor complained about our marketing practices? "As you know, the pharmaceutical industry is evolving rapidly," he continued, finally turning to face me. "Digital marketing, social media engagement, and multi-platform campaigns are becoming essential for reaching both physicians and patients. We need marketing leadership that understands these emerging technologies and can connect with younger demographics." I nodded, confused but still hoping this conversation was heading toward a discussion of training opportunities or team expansion. It wasn't. After extensive consultation with our board and external advisors, we've decided to restructure the marketing division under new leadership. Tyler will be taking over your regional responsibilities effective immediately. You'll be transitioning to a senior marketing specialist role, focusing on compliance documentation and legacy campaign maintenance. The words didn't make sense at first. Tyler, the kid who'd asked about influencer marketing for prescription drugs, was replacing me? The person who'd built the most successful marketing division in company history was being demoted to pushing paperwork? "Richard, I don't understand," I managed to say. "My division has exceeded every performance metric for 5 consecutive years. We've generated over $200 million in revenue, won multiple industry awards, and maintained perfect compliance records. What organizational changes justify this decision?" My voice remained steady, but inside I was reeling. 15 years of expertise, relationships, and proven results were apparently worth less than having the right last name. "This isn't about performance, Abigail. It's about strategic vision and future growth potential." Tyler brings fresh perspectives on digital marketing and demographic targeting that align with our 5-year strategic plan. He's also completed specialized training in pharmaceutical marketing through an accelerated executive program. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Tyler's specialized training was a 6-week online course that any entry-level marketing coordinator could complete in their spare time. His fresh perspectives consisted of suggesting we copy consumer product marketing strategies that would violate FDA regulations within hours. "The transition will begin immediately," Richard continued. "Tyler will need access to all your current projects, client relationships, and strategic plans. I trust you'll provide full cooperation during this change management process." Change management process. He was using human resources terminology to make my demotion sound like a business optimization rather than blatant nepotism. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being managed out of my own department by someone who couldn't spell pharmacokinetics without spell check. I sat in stunned silence for several seconds, processing the magnitude of what was happening. 15 years of building expertise, relationships, and reputation were being dismissed for corporate politics. The division I'd created from nothing was being handed to someone whose qualifications wouldn't get him hired as an intern at any serious pharmaceutical company. But this was happening, whether it made sense or not. "What about my team?" I asked. "They're highly specialized professionals with years of experience in pharmaceutical marketing. How will Tyler manage clinical compliance, FDA relations, and physician education programs? It was a legitimate question that revealed the fundamental problem with this decision. My team wasn't just marketing coordinators, they were medical communication specialists who understood complex scientific concepts and regulatory requirements. Tyler will have full management authority and will make staffing decisions based on operational needs, Richard replied. Translation: my team would either adapt to his approach or find themselves replaced with cheaper, less experienced employees. The thought of Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Chen, and Lisa Rodriguez having to report to Tyler Cromwell made me sick. These were accomplished professionals who deserved better than becoming training wheels for the boss's unqualified son. I need time to consider this change, I said, standing up from the chair. This is a significant alteration to my role and compensation, and I want to review the details carefully. It was a stalling tactic, but I needed space to think clearly about what was happening and what options I might have. Of course, Richard said, returning to his desk. HR will provide you with updated position documentation this afternoon. I trust this transition will be smooth and professional. The meeting was over. I was being dismissed from my own career by someone who'd probably never read a clinical trial report or attended an FDA hearing. As I walked back to my office, I realized that everything I'd built at Meridian was about to be handed over to someone who viewed pharmaceutical marketing as just another business vertical. The walk from Richard Cromwell's office back to my department felt like a funeral march. Every familiar hallway, every colleague's greeting, every detail of the workplace I'd called home for 15 years now carried a different meaning. I was no longer the director of regional marketing returning from a routine meeting. I was a demoted employee walking back to a department that would soon be run by someone with less pharmaceutical knowledge than a first-year medical student. My office door was still open, exactly as I'd left it 30 minutes earlier. The motivational quotes from industry leaders, my framed PharmExec award, the photo of my team accepting recognition at the American Marketing Association conference, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Katie was at her desk, pretending to work while obviously watching for my return. Her expression told me she'd already heard whispers from the executive floor. How did it go? She asked quietly, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. Katie had been my assistant for 4 years, and she understood the company's political dynamics better than most executives. She'd seen other talented professionals pushed out during restructuring initiatives, usually when they became inconvenient or expensive. Not well, I admitted. I've been reassigned to a specialist role. Tyler Cromwell will be taking over the division. Katie's eyes widened with disbelief, then narrowed with anger. She'd witnessed Tyler's complete ignorance of pharmaceutical regulations during his brief visits to our department. The idea of him managing complex clinical campaigns and FDA compliance issues was professionally insulting. That's insane, she whispered. He doesn't know anything about what we do here. Last month he asked Jennifer if we could just buy email lists and send promotional messages to doctors. He doesn't understand that pharmaceutical marketing is federally regulated. Katie was right, of course. Tyler's understanding of marketing came from consumer products and social media, where companies could make bold claims and target advertisements aggressively. Pharmaceutical marketing required scientific accuracy, regulatory compliance, and ethical consideration of patient welfare. Before I could respond, Jennifer Walsh appeared in my doorway. As my senior campaign manager and the person responsible for our most complex medical education programs, Jennifer had heard about the reorganization through the company's informal communication network. Her PhD in pharmacology made her one of the most knowledgeable pharmaceutical marketers in the region, and she'd been with my team for 6 years. Abigail, is it true about Tyler Cromwell? She asked, closing the door behind her. Marcus just got a text from someone on the executive floor saying there's been a major management change in our department. The news was spreading quickly, which meant Richard Cromwell hadn't bothered to plan a thoughtful communication strategy for this transition. Typical for someone who viewed employees as interchangeable resources rather than specialized professionals. It's true, I confirmed. Tyler will be taking over regional marketing operations immediately. I'm being moved to a compliance documentation role. Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to outrage. She understood better than anyone what this change meant for our department's future and our industry reputation. Abigail, he can't manage our programs, Jennifer said urgently. Our asthma education campaign involves partnerships with 12 medical centers and requires constant coordination with clinical research teams. Our COPD patient adherence platform integrates with electronic health records and has to meet HIPAA compliance standards. Tyler doesn't have the medical background to understand what we're doing, let alone manage it effectively. Jennifer was absolutely right. Our marketing campaigns weren't simple advertising efforts. They were complex medical communication programs that required deep understanding of clinical science, regulatory requirements, and healthcare provider needs. Tyler's experience managing social media for a craft brewery had given him zero preparation for navigating FDA advertising guidelines, medical ethics boards, or physician continuing education requirements. I know, I said, but this decision has already been made at the executive level. Richard said Tyler completed an accelerated pharmaceutical marketing program, though I suspect that means he took an online course or attended a weekend seminar. The absurdity of the situation was becoming clearer as I discussed it with people who understood the complexity of our work. Marcus Chen joined us within minutes, followed by Lisa Rodriguez and 3 other team members. My office was filling with talented professionals who'd heard rumors and wanted to understand what was happening to their department. These weren't generic marketing employees, they were specialists with advanced degrees, industry certifications, and years of experience in pharmaceutical communications. This doesn't make business sense, Marcus said bluntly. Our division has the highest ROI in the company, perfect compliance records, and industry recognition for excellence. Why would they replace proven leadership with someone who has zero pharmaceutical experience? It was a logical question that highlighted the fundamental irrationality of this decision. Because Tyler is Richard Cromwell's son, Lisa answered matter-of-factly. This isn't about qualifications or performance, it's about nepotism, and everyone in the company knows it. Lisa's background in hospital administration had given her a clear-eyed understanding of healthcare politics and organizational dysfunction. She'd seen similar situations in other healthcare organizations. The room fell silent as everyone processed the reality of our situation. We were witnessing a textbook example of how family connections could override merit, experience, and common sense in corporate environments. My team had spent years building expertise, relationships, and reputation, only to watch it all be handed over to someone whose primary qualification was genetic. What does this mean for our current projects? Asked David Kumar, our regulatory affairs specialist. We have 3 major campaigns in various FDA review stages, 2 clinical education programs launching next month, and ongoing partnerships with the American Lung Association. How will Tyler manage the regulatory compliance aspects of these initiatives? It was an excellent question that revealed the depth of the problem. Our active projects required constant oversight from professionals who understood pharmaceutical regulations, clinical trial protocols, and medical ethics guidelines. Tyler's lack of experience in these areas could expose the company to serious legal and regulatory risks. I don't know, I admitted. Richard said Tyler would have full management authority and would make staffing decisions based on operational needs. I assume that means he'll either need to rely heavily on your expertise or bring in his own team. Neither option was particularly reassuring. Tyler's ego and inexperience made it unlikely that he'd defer to our team's knowledge, but his lack of qualifications made it impossible for him to effectively manage our programs independently. Jennifer shook her head in disgust. This is how good pharmaceutical companies destroy their reputations. When you put unqualified people in charge of medical communications, patients suffer and regulatory agencies take notice. The FDA doesn't care about your family connections when they're reviewing advertising compliance or investigating adverse event reporting failures. She was absolutely right. Pharmaceutical marketing mistakes had serious consequences beyond just business metrics. Inaccurate medical information could influence physician prescribing decisions, affect patient outcomes, and trigger federal investigations. Our industry was regulated precisely because marketing errors could literally be matters of life and death. We need to document everything, I said, realizing that my team's knowledge and current projects needed to be preserved somehow. If Tyler is taking over operations, we need comprehensive records of every active campaign, regulatory requirement, and ongoing partnership. Not just for transition purposes but for liability protection. The meeting evolved into an impromptu strategy session. We spent the next 2 hours creating detailed documentation of every aspect of our department's operations, regulatory compliance procedures, clinical partner relationships, FDA communication protocols, ongoing research collaborations, and budget management systems. My team understood that they were creating a record that might be essential for protecting both the company and their own professional reputations. By lunchtime, word of the management change had spread throughout the company. My phone was buzzing with text messages from colleagues in other departments, industry contacts, and even physicians who'd heard rumors through their pharmaceutical company networks. The news was being received with a mixture of disbelief and cynicism. Everyone understood the political dynamics, but few could believe that Richard Cromwell would sacrifice a successful division for family favoritism. Dr. Patricia Hensley, my original mentor and now Senior VP of Marketing and Development, stopped by my office around 2 p.m. She looked exhausted and angry, clearly having spent the morning dealing with the fallout from Richard's decision. As someone who'd built her career on scientific integrity and merit-based advancement, she was personally offended by what was happening. "Abigail, I want you to know that I fought this decision as hard as I could," she said, closing my office door and sitting down heavily in the chair across from my desk. "I presented a detailed analysis showing your division's performance metrics, industry recognition, and strategic importance to the company. I argued that promoting Tyler without pharmaceutical experience would damage our reputation and create regulatory risks." What was Richard's response? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Corporate nepotism rarely responded to logical arguments or performance data. He said the decision had been made by the board based on strategic vision and leadership development priorities, Patricia replied, using air quotes to emphasize the corporate doublespeak. When I pressed for specific justifications, he talked about Tyler's fresh perspective and digital native understanding of modern marketing approaches. It was clear that no amount of data or logical argument was going to change his mind. Patricia had been my strongest advocate and professional champion for over a decade. If she couldn't influence this decision, no one could. The situation was becoming clearer. This wasn't a business decision that could be reversed through performance or persuasion. It was a family decision that had been predetermined regardless of consequences. What should I do? I asked. Patricia's experience and wisdom had guided me through every major career decision, and I needed her perspective on navigating this crisis. She'd seen other talented professionals face similar political challenges, and she understood the long-term implications better than anyone. "Document everything," she said immediately. "Every email, every performance review, every piece of evidence that shows your qualifications and Tyler's lack thereof. This decision is so obviously inappropriate that it creates legal exposure for the company. If Tyler fails, and he will fail, there's going to be finger-pointing and blame assignment. You need to protect yourself professionally and legally." Her advice was both practical and ominous. Patricia was essentially warning me that this situation was likely to get worse before it got better, and that I needed to prepare for potential legal battles or professional character assassination. The thought of fighting my own company in court was devastating, but the alternative was accepting professional humiliation and career destruction. Also, Patricia continued, "Start networking outside the company. Your reputation in the industry is excellent, and other pharmaceutical companies would be lucky to have someone with your expertise and track record. Don't let Richard Cromwell's bad decision define your career trajectory." She was right about my industry reputation. Over 15 years, I'd built relationships with physicians, researchers, regulatory specialists, and marketing professionals throughout the pharmaceutical sector. My work had been featured in industry publications, and I'd spoken at conferences across the country. Tyler Cromwell might be able to take my title, but he couldn't take my knowledge, experience, or professional network. "Patricia, what's going to happen to our current projects?" I asked. Some of these campaigns took months to develop and involve partnerships with major medical centers. If Tyler doesn't understand the clinical or regulatory complexities, he could destroy years of relationship building. Patricia's expression darkened. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Your team has built something really special here, marketing programs that actually serve patients while driving business results. Tyler's going to come in with consumer marketing approaches that don't work in healthcare. He'll either fail spectacularly or create compliance problems that damage the company's reputation." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on my door. Katie entered with a worried expression and a manila envelope marked Human Resources, Confidential. My new position documentation had arrived, which meant the demotion was now official and bureaucratically finalized. Patricia stood up as I opened the envelope. Abigail, whatever those documents say, remember that this decision reflects Richard Cromwell's judgment, not your value as a professional. You've built an incredible career, and this setback doesn't change that. She squeezed my shoulder supportively before leaving my office. The HR documentation was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism and legal protection. My new title was Senior Marketing Compliance Specialist, with responsibilities that included documentation management, regulatory archives maintenance, and legacy campaign administration. My salary was being reduced by $35,000 annually, and I was losing my performance bonus eligibility. Most insulting, I was being moved from my corner office to a cubicle in the compliance department. The position description made it clear that I was being sidelined into meaningless administrative work. Instead of developing innovative marketing strategies and managing complex clinical education programs, I'd be filing paperwork and organizing old campaign materials. It was professional exile disguised as a lateral career move. But the most revealing part of the documentation was what it didn't include. There was no performance justification for the change, no explanation of strategic rationale, and no mention of Tyler Cromwell or the restructuring initiative. HR had been careful to frame my demotion as a role optimization rather than acknowledging the obvious nepotism. They were protecting the company from legal liability while destroying my career. By 4 p.m., Tyler Cromwell made his first official appearance in my department. He arrived with a swagger that suggested he viewed this appointment as a well-deserved promotion rather than an unearned gift from his father. At 26, he looked even younger than his age, with perfectly styled hair, an expensive suit that didn't quite fit his slight frame, and the confident ignorance that comes from never having faced real professional challenges. Team, he announced, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention, I'm excited to bring some fresh energy and innovative thinking to this department. We're going to revolutionize pharmaceutical marketing with cutting-edge digital strategies and data-driven decision-making. The buzzwords rolled off his tongue without any apparent understanding of what they meant in a regulated healthcare environment. Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Chen, and Lisa Rodriguez exchanged glances that communicated volumes. They'd spent years working with me to develop sophisticated marketing approaches that balanced commercial objectives with scientific accuracy and regulatory compliance. Tyler's opening statement suggested he had no understanding of the complexity of pharmaceutical communications or the legal framework that governed our industry. I know some of you might be concerned about changes in leadership, Tyler continued. But I want you to know that I completed an intensive pharmaceutical marketing certification program just last month. I'm fully prepared to take this department to the next level. His intensive certification program was a weekend workshop sponsored by a pharmaceutical marketing software company. I'd received the same promotional materials and had dismissed it as basic continuing education for entry-level professionals. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. Tyler, could you tell us about your experience with FDA advertising guidelines and medical review processes? We have several campaigns currently under regulatory review, and these require daily oversight from someone familiar with compliance protocols. It was a fair question that immediately exposed Tyler's lack of qualifications. FDA advertising guidelines were complex, constantly evolving, and critical to every pharmaceutical marketing initiative. Medical review processes required understanding of clinical trial data, statistical analysis, and regulatory submission procedures. These weren't concepts that could be learned in weekend workshops. Tyler's confident expression faltered slightly. Well, obviously, I'll be working closely with our regulatory team to ensure compliance with all relevant guidelines. That's why we have specialists, so management can focus on strategic vision and innovative implementation. It was a non-answer that revealed his complete ignorance of the regulatory landscape. Actually, Jennifer interjected politely but firmly, our marketing campaigns require daily regulatory decision-making. When physicians ask questions about clinical data or when medical journals request additional documentation, We need immediate responses from someone who understands the underlying science and legal implications. Tyler's discomfort was becoming visible. He'd expected to walk into a department of generic marketing coordinators who would implement his innovative strategies without question. Instead, he was facing accomplished professionals who understood that pharmaceutical marketing required specialized expertise that he simply didn't possess. "I appreciate your concerns," Tyler said, his tone becoming slightly defensive, "but I think you'll find that my fresh perspective and digital marketing background will bring new energy to your established processes. Sometimes innovation requires challenging conventional approaches." The phrase "challenging conventional approaches" in pharmaceutical marketing was deeply problematic. Our conventional approaches weren't arbitrary traditions, they were regulatory requirements designed to protect patients and ensure scientific accuracy. Tyler was essentially announcing his intention to ignore industry standards and federal guidelines because he thought they were unnecessarily restrictive. Lisa Rodriguez, with her hospital administration background, understood the dangerous implications of Tyler's attitude. "Tyler, our conventional approaches are actually FDA mandates and legal requirements. We can't innovate our way around federal drug advertising regulations or medical ethics guidelines. Patient safety depends on our adherence to these standards." Tyler's expression hardened. "Lisa, I understand your attachment to existing procedures, but part of effective leadership involves making difficult decisions about operational efficiency. We need to focus on results rather than bureaucratic obstacles." He'd just dismissed federal pharmaceutical regulations as bureaucratic obstacles and characterized patient safety protocols as inefficient procedures. The room fell silent. Every member of my team understood that Tyler had just revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of pharmaceutical marketing that could expose the company to serious legal and regulatory risks. His attitude toward compliance wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. Jennifer Walsh broke the silence. "Tyler, I think there might be some confusion about the nature of pharmaceutical marketing regulations. These aren't internal company policies that we can modify for efficiency. They're federal laws enforced by the FDA, and violations can result in criminal charges, massive fines, and company shutdowns." Tyler waved dismissively. "Jennifer, I appreciate your caution, but sometimes regulatory agencies are more flexible than people think. My certification program emphasized the importance of building relationships with regulatory contacts and finding creative solutions to compliance challenges." It was clear that Tyler's certification program had given him dangerously inaccurate information about FDA enforcement. The idea that regulatory agencies were flexible about pharmaceutical advertising violations showed complete ignorance of how the system actually worked. Companies had been shut down and executives had gone to prison for the kind of creative solutions Tyler was suggesting. "Tyler," Marcus said carefully, "last year the FDA issued warning letters to 17 pharmaceutical companies for advertising violations. 3 companies faced criminal investigations, and 1 CEO was personally fined $2.3 million. The regulatory environment isn't really conducive to creative interpretation of compliance requirements." Tyler's confidence was clearly shaken, but instead of acknowledging his lack of knowledge, he became defensive. "Look, I understand that you're comfortable with the current approach, but part of my job is to push this department toward more aggressive marketing strategies. We can't let regulatory concerns prevent us from competing effectively in the marketplace." The statement revealed everything anyone needed to know about Tyler Cromwell's qualifications for managing pharmaceutical marketing. He viewed regulatory compliance as an impediment to business success rather than understanding that compliance was the foundation that made business success possible. His attitude would inevitably lead to violations, investigations, and potential criminal liability for everyone involved. My team was beginning to understand that they were facing an impossible situation. Tyler's ignorance wasn't just embarrassing, it was professionally dangerous. Working under his management could expose them to legal risks and damage their professional reputations. But challenging his authority could result in termination and career damage. "Tyler," I said, speaking for the first time since he'd entered the department, "perhaps we could schedule individual meetings where team members can brief you on their specific projects and regulatory requirements. That might help you understand the complexity of our current operations before implementing any strategic changes." It was a diplomatic attempt to give Tyler an education opportunity while protecting my team from immediately destructive decisions. If he could be taught the basics of pharmaceutical marketing regulations, perhaps the department could survive his leadership until a better solution emerged. Abigail, I appreciate the suggestion, Tyler replied with barely concealed condescension, but I think you're overcomplicating things. Marketing is marketing whether you're selling pharmaceuticals or breakfast cereal. The fundamentals are the same: identify your target audience, develop compelling messaging, and deploy effective distribution channels. The comparison between pharmaceutical marketing and breakfast cereal advertising was so fundamentally wrong that it bordered on professional malpractice. Breakfast cereal companies could make subjective claims about taste and lifestyle benefits. Pharmaceutical companies had to provide medically accurate information about drug mechanisms, clinical trial results, contraindications, and adverse effects. The regulatory frameworks weren't even remotely similar. Jennifer Walsh looked physically ill. As someone with a PhD in pharmacology, she understood that Tyler's attitude could lead to marketing materials that provided inaccurate medical information to healthcare providers. The potential patient safety implications were staggering. Tyler, Jennifer said with forced patience, pharmaceutical marketing is federally regulated because inaccurate medical information can harm patients. Every claim we make has to be supported by clinical trial data and approved by medical review boards. We can't use consumer product marketing techniques because we're providing medical information to healthcare providers who make life and death treatment decisions. Tyler's expression suggested that he viewed Jennifer's concerns as bureaucratic timidity rather than professional competence. Jennifer, I understand your perspective, but sometimes you have to be willing to take calculated risks to achieve breakthrough results. My background in digital marketing has taught me that aggressive strategies often outperform conservative approaches. The phrase calculated risks in pharmaceutical marketing was terrifying. Our industry didn't tolerate calculated risks with patient safety or regulatory compliance. Tyler was essentially announcing his intention to gamble with federal drug advertising laws and patient welfare to achieve breakthrough results. Marcus Chen, normally the most diplomatic member of our team, finally lost his patience. Tyler, with respect, your digital marketing background isn't relevant to pharmaceutical communications. We're not trying to increase social media engagement or drive website traffic. We're providing medical information to healthcare professionals who are treating seriously ill patients. The stakes are completely different. Tyler's defensive posture became aggressive. Marcus, I think you're being resistant to change and innovation. Part of effective leadership involves challenging team members who are too comfortable with established procedures. I expect this department to embrace new approaches rather than defending outdated methods. The accusation that my team was resistant to change was particularly galling. These were innovative professionals who developed award-winning campaigns and pioneered new approaches to patient education and physician engagement. Tyler was characterizing their expertise as obstinacy because they wouldn't abandon regulatory compliance for his uninformed strategies. Lisa Rodriguez stood up from her chair. Tyler, I need to be clear about something. Our established procedures aren't arbitrary traditions, they're legal requirements. If this department violates FDA advertising guidelines under your management, we could all face personal liability, including criminal charges. I'm not willing to risk my professional license and personal freedom for experimental marketing approaches. Tyler's reaction was swift and revealing. Lisa, if you're not comfortable with the direction this department is taking, perhaps you should consider whether this is the right role for your career goals. I need team members who are committed to success rather than focused on hypothetical risks. It was a barely veiled threat. Tyler was essentially telling Lisa that she could either abandon her professional ethics and legal obligations or find another job. The ultimatum revealed his intention to purge anyone who challenged his authority or questioned his dangerous approach to pharmaceutical marketing. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Tyler had just threatened to fire one of our most experienced and qualified team members because she'd insisted on following federal drug advertising regulations. His priorities couldn't have been clearer. Personal authority trumped professional competence, and business results mattered more than legal compliance. Jennifer Walsh gathered her materials and stood up. Tyler, I think this conversation has clarified the management philosophy you're bringing to this department. I need to consider whether I can continue in a role where regulatory compliance is characterized as resistant to change and where patient safety concerns are dismissed as hypothetical risks. Marcus Chen nodded in agreement. Tyler, I've spent 6 years building expertise in pharmaceutical digital marketing within FDA guidelines. If you're planning to abandon those guidelines for consumer marketing approaches, I'm not qualified to participate in that kind of campaign development. Within minutes, my entire senior team was expressing concerns about continuing under Tyler's management. These weren't emotional reactions or personal conflicts, they were professional decisions based on Tyler's clear intention to violate industry standards and federal regulations. Tyler looked around the room with obvious frustration and growing anger. His first day as department manager was turning into a mass revolt by the people he was supposed to lead. Instead of recognizing that his approach was flawed, he became defensive and authoritarian. "Let me be very clear," Tyler announced, his voice rising. "I've been given full authority over this department by the CEO, and I expect complete cooperation with my strategic vision. Anyone who can't adapt to new leadership approaches should seriously consider whether they belong in this organization." It was an ultimatum that revealed Tyler's fundamental misunderstanding of leadership and management. Instead of building consensus or addressing legitimate concerns, he was threatening employees with termination for refusing to participate in potentially illegal marketing practices. The meeting ended abruptly when Tyler announced that he needed to reassess departmental personnel based on commitment to organizational success. Translation: he was planning to fire anyone who challenged his authority or insisted on regulatory compliance. As my team filed out of my office, I realized that Tyler Cromwell's first day as department manager had probably destroyed the most successful marketing division in Meridian's history. His ignorance, arrogance, and hostility toward regulatory compliance had alienated every experienced professional in the department within 2 hours. The situation was even worse than I'd anticipated. I'd expected Tyler to be incompetent, but I hadn't prepared for him to be actively dangerous. His willingness to abandon FDA guidelines and threaten employees who insisted on legal compliance created liability exposure that extended far beyond marketing campaign failures. That evening, I received text messages from 3 team members indicating they were updating their resumes and contacting headhunters. Jennifer Walsh sent an email saying she'd spoken with a pharmaceutical law attorney about potential legal exposure under Tyler's management. Marcus Chen forwarded me a job posting from a competitor that was looking for experienced digital marketing specialists. By the end of Tyler's first day, it was clear that Meridian Pharmaceuticals was about to lose its entire experienced marketing team. Richard Cromwell's decision to promote his unqualified son had triggered an exodus of talented professionals and created regulatory risks that could destroy the company's reputation. The next morning brought my first taste of systematic isolation and professional sabotage. I arrived at my new cubicle in the compliance department to discover that my computer access had been restricted to basic email and document storage. My pharmaceutical marketing databases, industry contact lists, and project management systems were no longer accessible. More concerning, my email account had been removed from all marketing department distribution lists and project communication threads. Katie, my former assistant, stopped by during her lunch break with a worried expression. "Abigail, Tyler called an all-hands meeting this morning and announced that you were transitioning to new responsibilities and that all marketing communications should go through him directly. He also said that team members shouldn't discuss ongoing projects with anyone outside the current marketing structure." The message was clear: Tyler was cutting off my access to information and isolating me from my former colleagues. It was a classic corporate strategy for managing out unwanted employees. Make their jobs meaningless and uncomfortable until they quit voluntarily. "What else did he say?" I asked, though I suspected Tyler's meeting had been an exercise in damage control and authority establishment. "He talked about exciting new strategic directions and innovative marketing approaches that would revolutionize pharmaceutical communications," Katie replied, using air quotes to emphasize the buzzword-heavy presentation. Then he announced that Jennifer Walsh had decided to pursue other opportunities and that Marcus Chen was being reassigned to different projects that better matched his skill set. Phew! My stomach dropped. Jennifer and Marcus were among the most knowledgeable pharmaceutical marketers in the industry, and Tyler had apparently forced them out within 24 hours of taking over the department. The loss of their expertise would be devastating to ongoing projects and regulatory compliance efforts. Katie, what about the ARIES patient education campaign and the COPD clinical partnership program? I asked. These were complex initiatives that required constant oversight and regulatory coordination. Without experienced management, they could quickly become compliance disasters. Tyler said he was streamlining operations to focus on high-impact initiatives, Katie answered. I think that means he's canceling programs he doesn't understand and concentrating on projects that look like traditional consumer marketing. The implications were staggering. Tyler was apparently dismantling carefully developed medical education programs because they didn't fit his understanding of marketing. Years of relationship building with healthcare providers and medical researchers were being sacrificed for simplistic advertising approaches that might violate FDA guidelines. Over the following weeks, I watched from my compliance department exile as Tyler systematically destroyed everything my team had built. His first major decision was to cancel our physician education seminars because they were resource-intensive and difficult to track ROI. These seminars had been generating prescription increases and building long-term relationships with key opinion leaders in respiratory medicine. Tyler replaced our educational programs with direct mail campaigns featuring colorful brochures and promotional materials that looked like consumer product advertisements. The materials included bold claims about drug efficacy that weren't properly qualified with safety information and limitations. Any pharmaceutical marketing professional could see that these campaigns violated FDA advertising guidelines and would inevitably trigger regulatory action. Lisa Rodriguez lasted 3 weeks under Tyler's management before submitting her resignation. During her exit interview, she documented specific concerns about regulatory compliance and patient safety risks created by Tyler's marketing approaches. Her detailed memo to HR and the executive team outlined potential legal exposure from Tyler's advertising campaigns and management decisions. Marcus Chen transferred to the clinical research department rather than quit the company entirely. His new role involved supporting drug development rather than marketing, which protected him from liability exposure while keeping his pharmaceutical expertise within Meridian. It was a diplomatic solution that preserved his career while avoiding direct confrontation with Tyler. David Kumar, our regulatory affairs specialist, requested a transfer to the legal department after Tyler ignored his warnings about FDA compliance issues. David had 20 years of experience in pharmaceutical regulations, and his departure left the marketing department without anyone qualified to navigate federal advertising requirements. Within 6 weeks of Tyler's appointment, my former team had been completely dismantled. The experienced professionals had resigned, transferred, or been reassigned, leaving Tyler with entry-level employees who lacked the expertise to question his dangerous decisions. The first regulatory crisis occurred in November 2020, just 1 month after Tyler's promotion. The FDA issued a warning letter to Meridian regarding advertising materials that made unsubstantiated efficacy claims and failed to adequately present safety information. The letter specifically cited Tyler's direct mail campaign for ARIES, calling the promotional materials false and misleading. Richard Cromwell called an emergency executive meeting to address the FDA warning letter. According to Patricia Hensley, who briefed me afterward, Tyler attempted to blame the violations on insufficient guidance from the legal department and unclear regulatory standards. He showed no understanding that the warning letter was a serious federal enforcement action that could lead to criminal investigation. The FDA warning letter required immediate corrective action, including public correction of the misleading advertising claims and implementation of new compliance procedures. More concerning, it triggered a comprehensive review of all Meridian marketing materials and required regular reporting to the FDA about advertising practices. Patricia tried to use the regulatory crisis as an opportunity to question Tyler's qualifications and recommend management changes. She presented detailed documentation showing that the warning letter violations were directly attributable to Tyler's decision to ignore regulatory guidance and industry standards. I showed Richard the timeline and decision tree that led to the FDA action, Patricia told me during a confidential lunch meeting. Tyler ignored specific warnings from David Kumar, bypassed medical review procedures, and approved advertising claims that any qualified pharmaceutical marketer would have recognized as problematic. Richard Cromwell's response was predictable. He blamed external factors and defended Tyler's performance. Richard said the FDA was being unnecessarily aggressive and that Tyler was being unfairly targeted because he was implementing innovative marketing strategies, Patricia reported. He characterized the warning letter as a learning experience that would ultimately strengthen the department. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. Richard was apparently willing to risk federal enforcement action and company reputation to protect his son's position. The FDA warning letter, which could lead to criminal charges and massive fines, was being dismissed as a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. But the regulatory problems were just beginning. In December 2020, Tyler launched a social media campaign for our respiratory medications that included patient testimonials and lifestyle imagery designed to increase emotional engagement with our products. The campaign violated multiple FDA guidelines regarding direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising and patient privacy protections. Healthcare law attorneys immediately recognized the legal problems with Tyler's social media campaign. Patient testimonials for prescription medications required specific disclaimers and couldn't imply universal efficacy. The lifestyle imagery suggested that our medications would improve quality of life in ways that weren't supported by clinical trial data. Jennifer Walsh, now working for a competitor, sent me a private message warning that Tyler's social media campaign was generating discussion among pharmaceutical marketing professionals who recognized it as a compliance disaster. Abigail, industry colleagues are asking me about what's happening at Meridian. Tyler's campaigns are so obviously problematic that people are wondering if your company has lost its regulatory expertise. The professional embarrassment was compounding the legal risks. Meridian's reputation in the pharmaceutical industry was being damaged by Tyler's ignorant marketing decisions. Other companies were beginning to view us as an organization that couldn't manage basic regulatory compliance. In January 2021, the situation reached a crisis point. A physicians' advocacy group filed a formal complaint with the FDA regarding Tyler's social media campaign, alleging that the promotional materials provided misleading medical information that could influence inappropriate prescribing decisions. The FDA complaint triggered a comprehensive investigation of Meridian's advertising practices. Federal investigators requested all marketing materials, internal communications, and compliance documentation for the previous year. They specifically wanted to review the decision-making process that had led to the problematic campaigns. During the investigation, FDA reviewers discovered that Tyler had been approving marketing materials without proper medical review and regulatory oversight. They found email communications showing that he'd dismissed warnings from qualified professionals and characterized regulatory guidelines as bureaucratic obstacles. The investigation report was devastating. FDA officials concluded that Meridian had systematically abandoned established pharmaceutical advertising standards and that the company's marketing practices demonstrated reckless disregard for patient safety and regulatory compliance. Richard Cromwell was personally summoned to meet with FDA enforcement officials in Washington, D.C. The federal agency was considering whether to pursue criminal charges against company executives for knowingly violating pharmaceutical advertising laws. Patricia Hensley was asked to testify about the company's regulatory compliance procedures and management structure. During her testimony, she was required to explain how Tyler Cromwell had been given authority over pharmaceutical marketing despite having no relevant experience or qualifications. The FDA investigators were particularly interested in the decision-making process that led to Tyler's appointment, Patricia told me after returning from Washington. They wanted to understand how a company with previously excellent compliance records could suddenly start violating basic advertising regulations. The federal investigation was expanding beyond marketing violations to examine potential corporate governance failures and management accountability. FDA officials were questioning whether Meridian's executive team had exercised appropriate oversight and due diligence in pharmaceutical marketing operations. By February 2021, the legal and regulatory pressures were becoming overwhelming. Meridian's insurance company was threatening to cancel professional liability coverage unless management changes were implemented immediately. The company's board of directors was demanding explanations for the FDA investigation and regulatory compliance failures. Legal counsel advised Richard Cromwell that continued defense of Tyler's position could result in personal criminal liability for corporate executives. The combination of FDA enforcement action, professional liability exposure, and board pressure was finally forcing a recognition that changes were necessary. During this period, I was quietly building my own case with employment law attorneys who specialized in workplace discrimination and wrongful termination. The evidence was overwhelming. A qualified woman with 15 years of experience and proven performance had been demoted to make room for an unqualified male relative of the CEO. My documentation included performance reviews, industry awards, revenue figures, and testimonials from colleagues and clients. The contrast between my qualifications and Tyler's was so stark that employment attorneys immediately recognized the strength of potential discrimination claims. Abigail, this is one of the clearest cases of gender discrimination and nepotism I've encountered, said Amanda Roberts, the employment attorney I consulted. The company's own records show that you built the most successful division in their history, and they replaced you with someone whose qualifications wouldn't qualify him for an entry-level position. Amanda's legal analysis revealed multiple causes of action, including gender discrimination, wrongful demotion, and retaliation for challenging inappropriate management decisions. The strength of the case was enhanced by the documented evidence of Tyler's incompetence and the regulatory disasters that had followed his appointment. The FDA investigation actually strengthens your position, Amanda explained. Federal regulatory agencies don't typically investigate companies with strong compliance records unless there have been serious management failures. Tyler's violations demonstrate that the company prioritized nepotism over qualified leadership. By March 2021, I had documented everything necessary for comprehensive legal action against Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The evidence included employment records, performance documentation, regulatory violations, and witness testimony from former colleagues who could verify the circumstances of my demotion. But before proceeding with litigation, I wanted to give the company one final opportunity to address the situation appropriately. The FDA investigation and mounting legal pressures were creating an environment where rational decision-making might finally prevail over family loyalty. On March 15, 2021, I requested a meeting with Richard Cromwell to discuss my employment status and the department's regulatory situation. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in his office, with HR Director Margaret Flynn present as a witness. I prepared for the meeting like a trial presentation. My materials included comprehensive documentation of Tyler's regulatory violations, evidence of my own qualifications and performance, and analysis of the legal and business risks created by current management decisions. Richard Cromwell looked exhausted when I entered his office. The FDA investigation, board pressure, and mounting legal costs were clearly taking a toll on someone who'd never faced serious regulatory challenges during his career. Margaret Flynn sat beside his desk with a legal pad and a worried expression. Richard, I've requested this meeting to discuss the current situation in the marketing department and to propose solutions that could address both regulatory compliance issues and personnel management concerns, I began, setting my documentation on his desk. Abigail, I appreciate your concern about departmental operations, Richard replied carefully, but I need to remind you that Tyler has full management authority and that personnel decisions are made at the executive level based on strategic considerations. It was clear that Richard was going to continue defending Tyler despite overwhelming evidence of incompetence and regulatory failures. But I was prepared for his resistance and had come armed with information that he couldn't ignore. Richard, I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of the marketing department's performance under current management, I said, opening my folder. The evidence shows systematic regulatory violations, loss of experienced personnel, and damage to the company's industry reputation that could have serious long-term consequences. I presented the timeline of Tyler's management decisions and their consequences, the FDA warning letter, the social media campaign violations, the exodus of qualified professionals, and the current federal investigation. The pattern was undeniable. Every major decision Tyler had made had resulted in regulatory problems or operational failures. Furthermore, I continued, I've consulted with employment law attorneys who believe that my demotion in favor of an unqualified family member constitutes clear discrimination and wrongful termination. The legal exposure from personnel decisions may compound the regulatory risks the company is already facing. Richard's expression shifted from defensive to alarmed. The combination of federal investigation and potential employment litigation was creating liability exposure that could threaten the company's survival. Margaret Flynn leaned forward. Abigail, what specifically are you proposing? She asked, recognizing that this meeting was likely heading toward either resolution or escalation. I'm proposing that the company restore qualified leadership to the marketing department before the FDA investigation concludes, I answered. This would demonstrate commitment to regulatory compliance and could influence the federal agency's enforcement decisions. It was a reasonable proposal that addressed both the regulatory crisis and my personal situation. Restoring experienced pharmaceutical marketing leadership was clearly in the company's best interest, regardless of family politics or ego concerns. Richard was silent for several minutes, obviously weighing the legal and business implications of various decisions. The federal investigation, board pressure, and potential employment litigation were forcing him to consider options that prioritized company survival over family loyalty. Abigail, I need to discuss your proposal with legal counsel and the board of directors, he finally said. This situation involves complex regulatory and personnel issues that require careful consideration. It was a non-committal response, but it represented the first time Richard had acknowledged that changes might be necessary. The mounting pressures were finally forcing recognition that Tyler's continued management could destroy the company. Richard, I understand that these are difficult decisions, I said, gathering my materials. But the FDA investigation timeline and ongoing regulatory compliance requirements don't allow for extended deliberation. Every day that current management practices continue increases the company's legal exposure. The meeting ended without resolution but with clear understanding that the status quo was unsustainable. Richard Cromwell was being forced to choose between protecting his son's position and protecting the company's survival. Over the following week, I received signals that serious discussions were taking place at the executive level. Patricia Hensley reported that board meetings were becoming more frequent and that regulatory compliance was dominating the agenda. Legal counsel was apparently recommending immediate management changes to demonstrate good faith cooperation with the FDA investigation. On March 23, 2021, Margaret Flynn called to schedule an emergency meeting for the following morning. Her tone suggested that significant decisions had been made and that my proposal was being seriously considered. The second meeting in Richard Cromwell's office had a completely different atmosphere. Legal counsel was present, along with Margaret Flynn and Patricia Hensley. The room felt like a negotiation session rather than a defensive corporate meeting. Abigail, Richard began, after extensive consultation with legal counsel and the board of directors, we've decided to implement immediate changes in marketing department management to address regulatory compliance concerns and demonstrate our commitment to FDA cooperation. It was corporate speak, but the message was clear: Tyler was being removed from marketing management. The combination of federal investigation and legal liability had finally overcome family favoritism. Effective immediately, you're being restored to the position of Director of Regional Marketing with full authority over pharmaceutical advertising and regulatory compliance, Richard continued. Tyler will be transitioning to a business development role that better matches his background and interests. The solution was elegant and face-saving for everyone involved. I was getting my position and authority back. Tyler was being moved to a role where his lack of pharmaceutical expertise was less dangerous, and the company was demonstrating commitment to regulatory compliance. Additionally, Margaret Flynn added, your salary and benefits are being restored to their previous levels with back pay for the period of your reassignment. The company recognizes that the management restructuring created temporary disruption that affected your compensation. It was more than I'd expected. The company was not only restoring my position but compensating me for the financial losses I'd suffered during my demotion. The decision represented complete vindication of my qualifications and acknowledgement that Tyler's appointment had been inappropriate. Legal counsel outlined the terms of a confidential settlement agreement that would resolve potential employment litigation in exchange for my commitment to regulatory compliance, leadership, and cooperation with the FDA investigation. The terms were fair and addressed both my personal situation and the company's legal exposure. Abigail, we're hoping you can rebuild the marketing team and restore the department's regulatory compliance capabilities as quickly as possible, Patricia Hensley said. The FDA investigation is ongoing and we need qualified leadership to navigate the federal review process. It was a challenge that I was eager to accept. Rebuilding the marketing department would require hiring new talent, reestablishing regulatory procedures, and repairing relationships with healthcare providers who'd been confused by Tyler's campaigns. On March 26, 2021, I walked back into my corner office as Director of Regional Marketing. The space had been redecorated during Tyler's brief tenure, but it felt like returning home after a long and difficult journey. Katie was waiting with a stack of messages from industry colleagues who'd heard about my restoration and wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. My first priority was rebuilding the marketing team with qualified pharmaceutical professionals. Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Chen had both found excellent positions with competitors, but they provided references and networking assistance that helped me identify experienced candidates. Within 6 weeks, I'd hired 3 new senior marketing specialists with pharmaceutical backgrounds, 2 regulatory affairs coordinators, and a medical communications manager with FDA experience. The new team brought fresh perspectives while understanding the regulatory framework that governed our industry. The FDA investigation concluded in June 2021 with a consent decree that required Meridian to implement enhanced compliance procedures and regular regulatory reporting. The company avoided criminal charges by demonstrating good faith efforts to address the violations and restore qualified management. Tyler Cromwell transitioned to a business development role that involved identifying potential acquisition targets and partnership opportunities. His consumer marketing background was actually relevant to these responsibilities, and his lack of pharmaceutical expertise was no longer a regulatory liability. By the end of 2021, the marketing department had not only recovered from Tyler's destructive management but had achieved new levels of performance. Our regulatory compliance record was perfect, our healthcare provider relationships were stronger than ever, and our campaigns were being recognized for innovation within appropriate guidelines. The experience taught me valuable lessons about workplace politics, professional resilience, and the importance of documentation. When faced with discrimination and incompetent management, qualified professionals have legal and ethical obligations to protect both their own careers and their organization's integrity. Richard Cromwell never explicitly apologized for the nepotism and poor judgment that had created the crisis, but his actions demonstrated recognition that merit and qualifications ultimately matter more than family connections. The company's survival had depended on restoring qualified leadership regardless of personal preferences. Today, Meridian Pharmaceuticals has one of the strongest regulatory compliance records in the industry. Our marketing campaigns serve as models for ethical pharmaceutical communications, and our team is regularly consulted by other companies seeking guidance on regulatory best practices. The FDA investigation, while traumatic, ultimately strengthened our organization by forcing implementation of enhanced compliance procedures and qualified leadership standards. We proved that pharmaceutical companies can achieve commercial success while maintaining the highest ethical and regulatory standards. If you're facing workplace discrimination or nepotism, the most important advice I can offer is to document everything. Keep records of your performance, qualifications, and any evidence of inappropriate management decisions. Professional competence and legal protections can prevail over family connections and corporate politics, but only if you're prepared to fight for your rights. Workplace justice isn't always immediate, and the process can be emotionally and professionally challenging. But organizations ultimately depend on qualified professionals to achieve their missions, and regulatory agencies hold companies accountable for management decisions that affect public welfare. My story demonstrates that standing up for professional standards and regulatory compliance isn't just about individual careers, it's about protecting patients, maintaining industry integrity, and ensuring that qualified professionals can continue serving their organizations and society. The pharmaceutical industry, like many others, faces ongoing challenges with corporate governance, regulatory compliance, and merit-based leadership. But professionals who combine expertise with ethical commitment can influence positive change even in difficult organizational environments. If you've experienced similar workplace challenges or have insights about professional advocacy and regulatory compliance, please share your thoughts in the comments. Together, we can continue building workplace cultures that prioritize qualifications, ethics, and public service over personal connections and corporate politics. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe for more stories about professional integrity, workplace advocacy, and the ongoing effort to ensure that merit and competence guide important organizational decisions. Your career, your expertise, and your commitment to excellence matter more than you might realize.